Close to 3 decades ago, OECS governments were compelled to reconsider their economic models. The banana industry in the Windward Islands was on life support, and tourism was assuming greater prominence as pressure increased to diversify the economy.
During the 1995-1996 period, the buzz at that time was economic diversification.
Our economies were trying to diversify away from agriculture, mainly bananas.
Telecommunications was seen as one of the critical barriers to moving in that direction.
We also knew that we could not attract call centers because just about that time it had become clear too that we had to diversify the solution economy into services.
Have we recognized that telecommunication was a major factor?
The region was being deprived of the technology needed to help modernize its economy. The service providers appeared unconcerned about the needs of a struggling economy.
We were using very old technology, and it is very clear that the technology was outdated.
The studies around the world economics show that there was a big link with economic development and telecommunications.
Cable and Wireless enjoyed a monopoly and apparently did not feel the urgency to upgrade its services and facilities to world-class standards. On the customer relations front, service delivery was woeful in some cases and expensive across the board.
There were loud complaints, not just from the private sector, but from foreign investors, that the cost of telecommunications which was prohibitive. In other words, to use the language of the period, St. Lucia was not competitive because of the high cost.
A few years earlier in Dominica, the cable and wireless monopoly had been tested in court by a telecommunications company called Marpin.
We in Dominica actually pioneered some of this because we had this company called Mappin that wanted to offer phone service.
And that went to court and all the way to the Privy Council. So it was a very turbulent time, and of course there was a lot of resistance.
My good friend Anthony Astafan had in fact brought an action in the courts in Dominica to test the constitutionality of the exclusivity of the license in respect of Dominica. Because at the time he was representing a company called Marpin. And all of that had happened while I was at the Faculty of Law. And I remember he had turned to me for advice as to how best to approach this matter.
That was the impetus in some ways for the World Bank to come in and fund a regional regulatory authority.
An opportunity presented itself in St. Lucia for a reset of the telecommunications landscape.
Basically, what had happened was that the license that Cable and Wireless held was coming to an end in St. Lucia. And the government at the time recognized that it had a very unique opportunity, not only to rethink the license, but to determine whether the time had come to bring about major changes to the telecommunications landscape.
St. Lucia's stated intentions did not sit well with Cable and Wireless, and in particular, its well-paid staff, who along with other powerful forces, agitated aggressively against the move.
That included the British government to exert pressure on us, and also that included pressure coming from the employees within the Cable and Wireless family, who were fiercely opposed.
Fully aware of the Marpin litigation, the St. Lucia Prime Minister engaged his colleagues in the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, appealing for solidarity, and suggested it was the right time to rethink the telecommunications monopolies that existed in the islands.
And soon the word got out to Cable and Wireless that that was the intention of the government of St. Lucia, which meant that they mobilized all their resources and of course their influence in the region.
The battle lines were drawn.
I mean, I knew the consequences of renewing a license that gave Cable and Wireless exclusivity.
The OECS, in the meantime, found an ally in the World Bank who would provide the expertise and guidance needed to deconstruct a monopoly that had been in existence for decades.
We approached the World Bank for technical advice and financing to enable us to begin to explore the modalities of a new telecommunications environment.
Determined OECS leaders agreed to lay the groundwork for a liberalized telecommunications landscape.
There were a group of very committed people, very committed prime ministers.
Teams of technocrats put together a project that would eventually lead to the formation of a regional regulatory body.
Between 1996 and 2000, that project went on to create that infrastructure, that regional infrastructure for telecommunication, which we know today as ECTEL and the NTRCs.
Noting our small sizes in islands, it was not feasible to have a regulator in each country. So it was envisioned to have a regional approach to it, where you share costs regionally.
So it's like a global best practice. It's first in a class, in my view, in terms of telecommunications regulations, where sovereign states give up their individual sovereign authority for a collective.
Work began on crafting a framework for the establishment of the Regional Telecommunications Agency.
You had a major negotiating committee, and then you had about 5 or 6 subcommittees on every area, on financing, on the legal aspects, on the spectrum, on the technical issues. So you had these committees working on that.
The various committees and subcommittees got to work on multiple versions of a draft Telecommunications Act.
For instance, we had about, I would say, no less than 11 drafts of the Telecommunications Act, what we call ECTEL today. They had to go through different countries, different stages, different attorneys general, different governments.
This would eventually give birth to a Telecommunications Act which would lay the parameters for a liberalized telecommunications market.
So the treaty will recognize licensing, it will recognize interconnection, it will recognize all the major telecommunications topics and give a placeholder for the ministers to create subsidiary regulations.
In May 2000, the governments of Dominica, Grenada, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines came together to create the Eastern Caribbean Telecommunications Authority, ECTEL.
ECTEL was established, we will remember, because the signatory governments were desirous of creating a competitive environment.
You had 5 governments coming together and agreeing on a number of changes with a single piece of legislation that went through something like 10 or 11 iterations before we got to the end, plus regulations being developed. I'm not sure the OECS has ever experienced that kind of unity of purpose as it did then.
The time had come to engage the elephant in the room. 5 OECS governments agreed to break the chains of the monopoly. There was unity, but some hesitancy as well.
St. Vincent was not fiercely opposed. They were more lukewarm, a little nervous, uncomfortable, but they understood why it was necessary. So it was not difficult to convince them. But it was different in the case of the government of Grenada. And I don't know all the reasons why the government of Grenada initially was opposed.
Cable and Wireless fought relentlessly to maintain its dominant position on the market, threatening to shut down its operations.
There were very heated discussions at the time. I remember the one situation where I think they made an announcement in St. Lucia that they were going to close the company down. Cable and Wireless, that is at the company at the time.
Cable and Wireless actually threatened the governments that if St. Lucia moved in that direction, then it would be forced to react, and telecommunications in these islands may suffer as a result.
Such behavior caused the islands to close ranks and to move full steam ahead to liberalize the telecommunications market.
Cable and Wireless was, of course, very haughty. Typical colonial attitudes. They virtually believed that they could fool us again.
And they were just being recalcitrant and obtuse.
We wanted a competitive market. We were looking for new entrants to come into the market. and bring new services and bring more affordable services. Those were main things that we were looking for.
And we recognize that Grenada is so small, St. Lucia is so small, you cannot go it alone.
Cable and Wireless argued that a dismantling of the monopoly would affect its profit margin and asked for compensation.
They want to be compensated. How do we compensate them for losing that exclusivity?
The percentage of profits that were made. You know, we are a talking culture in the region. So when they say talk is cheap, talk wasn't cheap in terms of profits. So it really was a major profit-making center.
Perhaps the most significant issue there was Cable and Wireless requesting a really very, very large sum of money, 97 million US if I remember, to forego its exclusive licenses. And these negotiations were sometimes very difficult, but in the end there was an arrangement which was satisfactory to all parties.
These demands would not sit well with the affected member states of the OECS.
And I think the mapping decision and also the whole legal issue with mapping raised clearly to Cable and Wireless that they could not continue to do business as usual. They could not continue to rely on what they thought was a strong legal position.
And once the court had taken that position, then basically it really meant that the assault had commenced on Cable and Wireless.
Enter Calix George, St. Lucia's Minister of Communications, who was charged with the responsibility of leading the OECS delegation into negotiations with Cable and Wireless.
Calix George is an avowed anti-monopolist. He doesn't like monopolies.
He played a major role. He was really very driven and very passionate, and so I think he was able to maintain that passion.
We were very, very concerned, for example, of the use of the big stick. You know, the big stick approach, you know, we are the big boys.
I think the presence of Minister George at the time, being very forceful of personality as he was, I think brought a bit of a shocker to Cable and Wireless. It shocked them into understanding that, listen, this was a sort of very equal playing field. We were not here on our knees trying to get what we could from you, but we were sovereign governments negotiating with you.
In the end, the governments prevailed. Liberalization had been achieved. New players were free to enter the telecommunications market. Among them, Digicel.
Competition came to St. Lucia and St. Vincent at the same time, around March 2003. So the first competition came in more or less was mobile, in the mobile area.
Were it not for the changes that were made in the telecommunications sector, we would not have been able to attract the kind of investments that we have attracted over the years.
When the OECS Telecom Reform Project started, which is 1998, the cost to make a call to the US from St. Vincent from your home phone was 5 EC a minute. 1998. It was even higher years, but that was in 1998. Around 2000, within that 2-year period, while we were working with them, negotiating, doing some work, it came down to, I think, around $3 a minute.
The market was liberalized, yet something was amiss.
We really thought there'd be far more players coming in to compete.
So currently in the region, ECTEL region, we have mostly 2 players in the mobile market in most of the islands. In Grenada, I think we have 3. In the broadband side of it, which is internet that everybody want to use, again, it's mostly 2 players. In St. Vincent, we have 2 players in some areas. In some areas in St. Vincent, we have 1 player.
And so we were reduced to Digicel and to Flow. And even that is in danger right now. So I don't know where that will lead to.
And that was something we had hoped would have been eliminated by liberalization of that sector. So there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of really people enjoying the benefit of breaking a monopoly. It's like we have 2 monopolies now, really, in a sense.
It's now 2026. ECTEL has been impacting the telecommunications sector for over a quarter of a century, a major feat for a regional institution.
We've been able to sustain and maintain ECTEL as a regional regulatory institution. I think that has been the hallmark of what has happened. That to me is the most satisfying part, that it hasn't been dismantled and hasn't gone away.
And it's another powerful lesson in regional solidarity, because when we stay together, work together as one group of countries, and made sure that there were no cracks among us, that is when we succeeded, and we were able to achieve the transformation that occurred these past 20 years.
ECTEL's many accomplishments included a liberalized market across 5 contracting states. Increased competition drove costs down. There was expanded access to broadband and mobile services. Consumer rights were protected through robust regulations. And the groundwork had been laid for the growth of a digital economy. And there's more for ECTEL member states. The new e-licensing platform recently launched by ECTEL brings several important benefits to telecom operators, internet service providers, broadcasters, and entrepreneurs across the Eastern Caribbean. Applications can now be submitted online, making the process more convenient, easier, and faster. Also, ECTEL's recently concluded Digital Inclusion Survey report gives governments, regulators, and businesses hard evidence about who is being left behind in the digital economy and why. That information is vital for the formulation of more impactful telecommunications policies. One of the distinguishing accomplishments of ECTEL was the establishment of the Universal Service Fund.
For example, in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, we have used that to put internet service in all our schools, right? So, and this is something globally they're still trying to achieve. We were able to achieve that in St. Vincent and the Grenadines in 2010.
I think that's the only way we can level the playing field. That's the only way we can give children the opportunity. They should be able to go home and access the internet without it being a cost burden on any of their parents.
NTRC St. Vincent and the Grenadines ensured that the multiple islands comprising the Grenadines received the same quality service available elsewhere.
Whereby we have the same speeds now on all islands since 2018. That was commissioned. So that's one of the biggest achievement I think we have done in the sector in my period, to ensure everyone is included.
An emergency network was also created for marine traffic, a facility created to benefit fishers across the region.
So we installed an emergency maritime communications project to provide VHF communication and distress signaling stuff. Another project which is still working today.
You can have a fisherman going out to sea with a cell phone and being able to access emergency services or still communicate. I mean, it's just, that's been an amazing impact.
26 years on, and the telecommunications landscape continues to change with increased rapidity.
ECTEL has to readjust to this new environment. On the one hand, to begin to prepare the populations for this new emerging technology and how we're going to access it, and what is the best use we should make of it. But on the other hand, be far more protective of consumers.
ECTEL needs to expand its mandate to cover content, programming, and these other issues they call a converged regulator of data privacy and data protection. And which also cover AI and cybersecurity. All this stuff, you can't divorce them from telecom networks, so they are all related.
ECTEL is hoping the new Electronic Communications Bill, soon to be passed by all member states, will help meet the major challenges of the future. Among them, data privacy, cybersecurity, 5G rollout, and satellite services. ECTEL remains committed to ensuring that every citizen, every business, and every economy in the 5 contracting states can thrive and enjoy the benefits of a rapidly evolving digital world.